Man's greater body and the feeling life. We have now shown that the whole round circle of being and its manifestation from star to farthest star and beyond is mind. Everything originates in mind. All things are thoughts. All form is idea. All substance is mental. Even what we call spiritual things can be but thought in finer form. And spiritual men and women are those whose thoughts are purest, finest, and most godlike. Love itself is the unified consciousness, and its emotions are the distilled essence of higher thinking. Herein is God made manifest as one, for we cannot conceive of anything apart from mind, and there is no place outside of that mind. Yet, for the purposes of clearness, we may have other names for God and other words for that which goes in mind. Original feeling is a name which we may give to first cause, because God becomes manifest through the impulses of feeling life. This term indicates the depth of thought. It is not merely the idle floating of imagination out into space, but the rich conviction of a purpose. Thus, feeling may be called in general the creative quality in God, and so in man. Again, we may note that certain types of thought tend to group themselves to form a particular attribute of mind. Low vibrations of thought becomes inorganic matter and take form as such. Higher vibrations become cell life and tissues and act harmoniously together as organic laws of physiology and biology. Finer thought forces assemble themselves around a common center and form what we call the feeling body. This is that expression of the self which is distinctly personal but not obvious as is the physical body. As the substance is still thought, the expression is vibration, and as there must be form wherever there is vibration, the feeling body must have form and occupy space in some way. Can we really find the presence of such a feeling body of each of us? And if so, what is its extent, nature, and purpose? Because we are so accustomed to judge our universe from the standpoint of what we can see, touch, and measure with physical instruments, it is hard for us to realize how much of the object world itself is invisible to us. Yet, we are surrounded by innumerable forms of life and matter which we cannot cognize by the ordinary senses. Says Flammarion, between the last acoustic sensation perceived by our ears and due to the 36,850 vibrations per second, and the first optical sensation perceived by our eye, which is due to 400 trillion vibrations per second, we perceive nothing. There is an enormous interval to which no one of our senses brings us into relation. We see then that forms can and do undoubtedly exist around us, of which we are not at all conscious. And as there are those whose powers of sight transcend the physical instrument of the eye, we might expect that such forms would be frequently detected. Such indeed is the case, and throughout the ages people who have often been called clairvoyant, that is, able to see without the eye, have declared that they could see a more subtle body surrounding other individuals. This body has sometimes been called the aura and has been represented in art by the halo which surrounds the heads of saints. For it is quite possible now to photograph the fine vibration or odic fluid that radiates from us all, says Maeterlinck. Reichenbach was first to discover that sensitive persons could see the effluvia in the dark. After experiments, he proved that its power varied with the emotions and status of mind of the subjects. He found that it was of bluish colour on the right side and yellowish on the left. The power of this fluid, then, varies with the emotions and status of mind of the subject. This we would know from the fact that everything has its origin in mind, and that this feeling body is simply the form in which the higher consciousness of the individual clothes itself. And we may add to this the fact that this feeling body is also affected profoundly by the thoughts and acts of other people. For example, a very sensitive person was asked by the experimenter to put his hand in a glass of water. He did so and was then removed to another part of the room. A pin was thrust into the water, and he not only was conscious of it, but winced with the pain as much as though the pin had been thrust into his physical body. It is not my purpose here to discuss the question as to how many bodies an individual might have, that is, the different types of vibration, but only to show the extent to which the feeling life manifests in our experience. Therefore, no distinction is attempted between aura, odic fluid, etc. Two other characteristics of this feeling consciousness should be mentioned. First, it is the medium through which the conscious mind acts upon the physical structure. It lies, as it were, between the conscious or objective mind and the physical body and environment. Whatever we desire to accomplish on the physical plane must be accomplished through it. We give our instructions to it, and it carries them out. Second, the feeling consciousness is impersonal. It does not initiate any movement in the body or in the thought. It takes any impression given it and reports it or causes the body to react to it. If the hand of the subject is scratched on the photographic plate, this consciousness feels it and records it in the body and in the mind. It varies, as Maeterlinck has told us, with the emotions and status of the individual concerned. We thus have confirmed again that it is simply a form of the creative activity of mind and is really the mind functioning impersonally. We are now ready to see how this intermediary agent operates in regard to the affairs of our lives and the very destiny of our souls. We have found that the feeling body or consciousness is very susceptible to mental influence of any kind. It is open to thought coming from any direction, from either without or within. These thoughts fall as seed upon fertile soil, and as this consciousness has no will of its own, but only an instinct to create, it begins to take any thought and work upon it. Throughout our lives, seed continues to fall, and the person who is unconscious of these laws is always open to unseen and unknown influences from without. How quickly we catch the contagion of fear around us. How strangely we react to another's mood. How open we are to impressions, and how often we are swept off the feet of our better judgment by some strong mind. How frequently we become downcast without apparent cause and then rise to an unexpected buoyancy of spirit. Someone says, "You do not look well," and at once we begin to feel our pulse. Another says, "Times are going to be hard," and we begin to feel the pinch of those times. Worst of all, we are all open to the vagrant thoughts and ideas which are always flying about, for a thought is a vibration and goes on its frictionless way throughout the ethers. These thoughts, as though they were angels, come to the heart that is like them, or like devils, they flock to the place where they feel most at home. Thus, the sins of our fathers are visited upon us, and we let them visit, and most of us keep a spare chamber. Especially are we open to the invasion of thoughts directed purposely at us. There are those who envy and those who oppose our plans and purposes. Often, they do not consciously wish us harm, but they are thinking such thoughts about us as are not for our best good. If we are unguarded, these thoughts come to us, find entrance through the impersonal neutral consciousness and make their impression upon it. Being impersonal and creative, this consciousness registers on our bodies as disease, on our conditions as failure, on our minds as depression. So, if one were really hostile to us, he might deliberately practice magic, which is by no means out of fashion. In that case, his thought would gather up all the forces of negative thought which were not consciously directed at us, and one hostile mind could then lead an army of inimical forces against us. On the other hand, our protection is quite adequate. We must remember that no physical or mental reaction is possible except through the consciousness. If then we allow hostile impressions or suggestions to be made upon it, then disaster will follow. If, on the other hand, we insist that no influence shall affect us except by our own conscious choice, then the consciousness will not pick up the flying thought. We are like the wireless telegraph instrument. We record only those messages to which our instrument is attuned. A full protection is thus assured against the most malicious influence by the simple expedient of declaring that you will not receive such thoughts from any direction. It is even a good plan in some cases to ridicule the power of such thoughts in cases where you feel that mental pressure is being brought to bear upon you. Judge Troward says, look it mentally in the face and say, cock-a-doodle-doo, and that is not bad advice. Everyone should occasionally think of himself as surrounded by an impenetrable barrier which no negative thought can enter. We are moving through a world more subtle than we have supposed, and we may as well cognize the unseen forces of evil long enough and no longer to declare our protection against them. No evil shall befall me, because I have made the Most High my habitation. We are frequently in the presence of strong-minded people who, without meaning to use bad mental influences, still desire us to do their will or accept their dictum. They not only cause their thought to impinge on our sensitive consciousness, to act as suggestion, but a real force goes out from them. The odic fluid of which we have previously spoken is a subtle form of force which probably emanates from large numbers of individuals and strikes directly upon the organism unless we protect ourselves. This force can be photographed. It is strong enough to cause a lever to tip, a copper needle to vibrate, or to set a clock in motion within a sealed glass vessel. It is powerful enough to move a table weighing 200 pounds and to magnetize minerals. Many healers send it forth in the treatment of patients, usually draining their own forces in using it. I have treated healers who felt this influence go forth from them in waves. I have known of others who, in healing, sent off this current in an encircling motion, going out to the patient and returning again. One can imagine with what energy such a force impinges directly upon the organism of those toward whom it is directed. This probably explains those cases of remarkable personal magnetism with which history deals. Whole atmospheres are charged with this psychic energy, and places are affected by the presence of one powerful individual. It seems to me, therefore, that one should occasionally examine his own consciousness to see how much it is affected by the opinions, prejudices, will and oppositions of others, and counteract any such influences by the quiet direction of his own forces. In the case of cancer and some other diseases, advanced physicians today are using powerful electric waves to drive back the vibrations which stream in vivid colours from the affected organ. Shall we do less in protecting ourselves against those attacks of personal magnetism which either consciously or unconsciously are directed against us? And if we can do it in no other way, we should certainly avoid contact with those whose dominating mind overpowers our own will and causes us to move about as puppets at the bid and call of their desires. This is particularly true in the case of those who claim to be the directors of our religious destiny and to know the only way by which our souls can climb into heaven. The religious say so. The "only my way to heaven" doctrine is but another way to beat down and imprison the splendid freedom of the soul. So anywhere and everywhere that men would enslave us, we must rise up and declare the immortal heritage of our birth, our will to will our own good. Let no man enslave your soul. Thus does each one of us choose the pathway of his destiny.